Hi, everyone. Today we are talking about how to get your first job as a database administrator. This is one of our Triage Tuesday webcasts. Every Tuesday at 11:30 a.m. Central, we give a free webcast on a different topic affecting SQL Server or something related to database or data management, whatever is exciting and interesting to us. My name is Kendra Little, and I'm a founder of Brent Ozar PLS LLC, and I'm also a Microsoft Certified Master in SQL Server. I work full-time with SQL Server as a consultant, and I started out as a database administrator, just an ordinary database administrator. But before that, I actually started out as somebody who just really likes working with T-SQL, was interested in data, and knew how to use Excel and Access and stuff like that. So that leap of being a business user and somebody who wants to get started in database administration to getting that first DBA job, that's a pretty hard leap sometimes. And today I'm going to tell you about why that is and how you can help make that leap, how to make that leap a little bit easier for you, because that big first step is really often the hardest one. First things first, I'm going to talk a little bit about what does a DBA do. A database administrator may do a large variety of things. So you'll find that there are, especially for as you first become a DBA, you start out as a junior DBA. And the tasks of a junior DBA typically include backups, restores, dealing with tickets from customers, initial server configuration, building out, installing SQL Server and configuring them according to best practices and guidelines. And often include, little tasks, figuring out why a job failed and rerunning the job, making sure that the SQL Server is running well. And I think this is usually the case because sometimes the junior DBA gets a job where they're the only DBA or where resources are so thin that they really have to do everything and they're just thrown into the pool and they have to figure out how to survive. There are good and bad things about these two roles. When you're thrown into the big pool, you do learn an awful lot, but it's often much harder. So as we talk through this and as we talk about getting your first DBA job, I'll tell you how to identify what you really want, which type of this job is good for you, and how to navigate through an interview and make sure you're getting the job that's right for you. Why should you take my advice? Well, there's one simple reason to take my advice, and that is that I have 5 years of experience hiring DBAs and helping people hire DBAs. I've helped fill positions for junior, mid-level, and senior DBAs, and this is something I still do to this day. We have clients who are looking for candidates all over the place, because the good news for you is that the job market for DBAs is really hot for the DBAs. It's really hard to find a good DBA these days. There's a scarcity. So it can be difficult for people to get the right person into that job, which means if you have no experience at work or very little experience, maybe you can get a job that you couldn't get if the market was more full. So I've had this role in helping people from the time that I first became a mid-level DBA, helping fill positions on my team and those of neighboring teams, because the problem is, if you need to hire someone who's a specialist in an area, the hiring manager often has a problem of, how can I tell if this person really knows what they're talking about, unless they also have those skills? So to this day, I still help clients figure out what is the type of DBA that you're targeting, what are the skill levels that are your minimum requirements, and how do you test and find those skill levels? And I also sometimes counsel candidates on helping figure out exactly what they're looking for and how they can represent themselves. There's a few steps that we're going to cover today, and then I'll recap them at the end so that you can review them. The first step is understanding what you're getting into in terms of a job. If you haven't been a DBA before, there are good things and bad things about this job, and I'm just going to give you the highest level of them. In terms of what's great about this job, there is a fantastic community around, especially SQL Server DBAs. This is the one I'm the most familiar with, where you can meet people at conferences in your area and online and ask questions and get help and learn and grow and interact with people in a really great way. The jobs for this are going to be around for a long time. You don't have to worry about getting trained up in this and then not having a job anymore. This is something that's going to really, I believe, be with us for a good long time. And you're always able to grow and raise in this job. It's not like this is a job where you're going to learn a certain amount and then you're just kind of done. There's always going to be room to expand in this career, which to me is a fascinating thing and means that you can always deepen your knowledge or expand your interest, right? You could decide, I am going to expand my interest and work on business intelligence. Or you could just decide, I'm going to go deep, deep, deep into knowing exactly the internals on how everything about the engine works. Or you can do both, and you can change your direction in your career, right? So not only will the job be around for a long time, but you can shift around in this profession in a really cool way that makes it interesting for you when you want it to be interesting. Also, you get pretty darn good pay as a mid-level and senior DBA. We'll talk about pay for junior DBAs and whether there's any trade-offs you might want to take. But in terms of comparing with other IT jobs, if you check out career sites, the pay for DBAs can be really, really great. There are, of course, some things that aren't perfect. This is a drawing here that I drew of a self-portrait of myself during many of my DBA years, sleeping under a desk. And this happened more than once. It doesn't happen so much anymore. Like, I think you, once you get to a certain point in your career, you can choose to still have the lifestyle of periodically sleeping under a desk. Some people love that. Or you can choose to break out of that and find more options. Now, there are a lot of hours and stress on this, and getting what people call work-life balance is typically the biggest problem in a DBA job. There will be times when you're spending time with your family and there's an emergency and you get called, and maybe you're not the one on call, but they just need your help. And as a DBA, your job is to really, really answer that. The other problem that I've had and that I've noticed that other people have sometimes is that the learning curve is really, really steep. And the steep learning curve will come back over your career. So at first, when you're just getting into this as a profession, it's overwhelming. And it's really hard to keep up with the profession. Then you get your grounding and you're doing well. But this can always come back where you hit a new challenge. Say you've mastered a lot of different components and now you have a new CLR component that's being installed in your database and you're not familiar with .NET or how that interacts with SQL Server. All of a sudden, you've got a whole lot more to learn there, right? You'll just hit these different things where you're forced to really learn a lot more, and it's difficult at times. So if you're not somebody who likes being confronted with really difficult problems at times, this might not be the right thing for you. You have to really like taking on those challenges and getting there, and you have to have a lot of energy to do that. The second thing is to have an idea of what makes a good DBA, and I want to stress that this is critical to you landing a job. What you want to do when you're looking for any job is you want to look at not only what is that job and what is involved for people, but what does success look like at that job. So for a DBA job, I want you to meet some DBAs and talk to them if you don't already know them. If you do already know them, just ask them some questions about what they think makes a good DBA and outline in your mind a picture of, here is how someone is successful at that job, because only if you have a concept of this, that's the only way you're going to be able to explain why you would be good at that job. There's two things I think that make a good DBA. One of them is love of learning and an appetite to always learn more. This is what I talked about with that learning curve. You've got to always be somebody who actually enjoys really learning stuff to be successful at this job long term. The second thing is, as I like to call it, just a real thickness and the almost inability to do a bad job. And with this, I don't mean you have to be a perfectionist. What I'm really talking about here is there will be a lot of times as a database administrator when there's a really nagging issue and it's really hard to solve, and you will just have to be the most persistent person in the world. Because other people may give up on it. Other people may have crazy ideas how to fix it, but you really have to be the person who sticks to it and just says, I really want to see this through. We really have to fix this the right way now. We shouldn't take any shortcuts. That's often the voice of the DBA. And the person who makes a really good DBA is the person who wants to really take care of a system and make it healthy and make it right. These are the two characteristics that I personally associate with what makes a fantastic DBA. But I want you to actually talk to people and come up with your own conception of it. You need to really believe this in order to talk about how that relates to your personal skills and strengths. That'll be really critical to getting a job, is to explain, here's why I'm going to be great at this job. I don't have it yet, but here's what makes somebody good at it, and I have that. In addition, you want to look at things from the hiring manager's perspective. The hiring manager's perspective is always going to be a little different than the person looking for a job. And the hiring manager tends to want one thing. or they think they want one thing. When they talk about things, they say they want one thing. They say they want experience. And I saw there was a question somebody came up that says, Valerie asked, many job ads want mid to senior level DBA jobs. Where are the junior DBA jobs? This is the hard part about getting your foot in the door. But right now, there's not a lot of great mid-level DBAs out there. So if you're looking to get in the door, you may want to try to apply to those mid-level jobs. Now, you may not get them, right? You may have a lot of like knocking on doors and not getting anywhere. I'll give you a couple techniques to try to make it easier later. But the problem is people want experience, right? They want at least a mid-level DBA often who's had a while to look at things. But if they can't find someone who's got a lot of experience, what is the other way a hiring manager would think about experience, right? So what does experience really mean to a hiring manager? It means they want someone who's trustworthy. This is a really big trait, right? Because the database administrator is in charge of one of the company's most critical lifeblood things, the data of that company. They have to keep it online. They have to keep it secure. They have to keep it backed up, right? So they make sure this company isn't going to go out of business, because many companies would either lose huge amounts of money or go out of business if their data was lost or unavailable for a long time. So as somebody who doesn't have experience, the challenge is, how is it that you show that you are trustworthy, or you have the skills that make a DBA trustworthy? And that's probably an and there. You should be trustworthy and you should have the skills that make a DBA trustworthy. There's a couple things I want you to focus on. The first is backups. Now, a hiring manager isn't going to necessarily think, I want somebody who understands backwards, back and forward, haha, little joke there. But when they talk to a candidate, and either they or someone else does a technical screen, they are naturally going to find out what you know and what you don't know. And you want one of the things you know to really well to be backups. So I want you to invest time in figuring out, how do I back up any different type of database in SQL Server? What databases should be backed up? What are the best practices for backup? This also means you need to learn restores. How do I restore different types of databases? How do I restore to a different point in time? Can I restore a system database? You need to build yourself a lab and actually do these things so that you can actually there's a way to get experience without having a job. It is to build yourself a test lab, and you can get a developer edition of SQL Server for about $50, I believe it is. There's a way to build yourself a test lab so that you can do these simple commands. You can use the GUI and learn the T-SQL and say, I've actually done these things. It was in a test environment. Don't lie about where it was. But I took the initiative to do these things and learn backups and restores really, really thoroughly. That's two things. The third thing I want you to learn is index basics. And as the comment says on the slide, index basics, like it's 2 words, but it represents a whole field of information, right? You're not going to learn everything there is to know about indexes before you get your first DBA job. But you really want to understand, what do indexes do? Why do people want them? How do I maintain them? Those are kind of the big basics you want. And you want to play around with them in your lab as well. So altogether, this could be a lot of stuff to practice and work on, right? I said backups, I said restores, I've said indexes, but this actually represents a large body of experience and work. But really, if you have limited time, this is a lot less than trying to focus on every single thing you could do as a DBA with SQL Server. So what you want to do if you have limited time is make sure that you know something really well. If you don't have time to do backups, restores, and indexes, do backups as deep as you can so that you can talk about your experience with, I trained myself to do backups, I built out my, I installed SQL Server in a lab environment, and I've practiced this backups on databases using all these different recovery models. So make sure that you can cover at least one technical area really, really well, and make it specific so that you can talk about that with the hiring manager. Then as time goes on, you can expand that to include some of these other areas. Step 4, and this is one that we often skip, is you want to be really clear on what you really want. When you're looking to get into a job, it is far too easy to focus on what the hiring manager wants. And I do want you to consider that, right? That's why we're learning these things sort of specifically. But you also want to have a really clear sense of your own goals, your direction, and what you want out of the experience. Because guess what? This is a huge thing that makes you attractive as a candidate. Not only does this help you get to your goals, but you also make yourself actually more hireable by having a sense of this and being able to convey a sense of this. here's some suggestions I have for things that you may want. I want you to formulate your own, but here's some suggestions. For me, a really big one as I was getting a DBA job was room to learn. And I actually took, personally, the right path for me was to first take a contractor job as a full-time DBA. I had been doing some database administration in a lab environment, but my duties before that had included a lot of other things, and I really wanted to focus and be a DBA. So I went out and actually got a contractor job as a DBA. Now, that could have gone really badly for me. Could have ended up not having the job for long. The contract could have been removed. I didn't make great money at it. But for me, the risk was worth it at that time in my life, and the risk was acceptable. And I got this huge amount of room to learn. It was extraordinarily valuable to my career and really let me move on and learn more and become more competent and get this great experience in a production environment. So room to learn was huge for me. And I really think that when you're getting that first job, talk to the hiring manager about saying, I want to really expand my experience as a DBA. I want to work with these technologies. Do you have room for me to learn that? That's my big goal. Also, it's great to look for a job where you may have a mentor. And you can ask a hiring manager that. Is there someone on this team who can mentor me when it comes to SQL Server? That's a perfectly fair and great question to ask. Know that a mentor isn't necessarily a friend. So there may be someone that you meet in your rounds of interviews who seems really stern and like they may not, taste you and you don't have charisma with them. That's okay. That person could actually still be a great mentor. It's probably not that they don't like you. It's probably just that they're interviewing you and they've made some bad hires and they want to make sure they make a good hire, right? So don't take that the wrong way. When you're looking at a job, just look for someone who has really good experience and what you want to look for in a mentor is someone who's been around the block and who's still learning. They understand the best practices in SQL Server and they like to learn new things about SQL Server. So when you're getting interviewed by people on a team and it's your turn to ask questions, you can ask them, what do you think about the newest version of SQL Server? What do you think about these new features? As a way to get a sense of how they take to new technology and whether they're really forward-looking. And just ask them questions about how they work with technology to see if they're going to be a good fit for you. You asking those questions is going to make a real difference in terms of how they see you as a potential hire as well, right? So this having a sense of what you want and asking for it actually works for you. Of course, you also want to look at salary. And when I first, got that full-time DBA job, I did not do a great job negotiating on salary. I negotiated on salary a little bit, which at least was nothing, but at least was better than nothing. But I do want to say that even when you're getting a first DBA job, don't look at yourself as totally desperate. Figure out what exactly it is that you want. Now, you may not get the exact salary that you want, but do negotiate on it. Negotiate on the salary and other benefits just like you would for any other job. Because you want this to be a job where you can stay and grow for a long time. You don't want to be just leaving this job for another job. You want a place that's going to pay you something that you really can live with, right? After you've figured out, what it is that makes a good DBA and why you're a good DBA, what the hiring manager wants, what you want, you need to make sure that your resume really represents you well. Because resumes are a big thing in terms of being spread around. It's for people's first impression of you, really, right? Now, I'm not going to say that a resume is the way to get a job. A resume is a tool that can help you get a job, but it's really, really hard to just send a resume somewhere and get a job. Talk to you about alternatives in a moment. But that resume is going to be the way that if you do get an interview, everybody on that interview loop is going to see your resume before they see you. So you need to give the right first impression for that resume. Don't feel like you need a 5-page resume detailing everything you've ever done with technology. People will get bored. They'll find little things in there that aren't exactly right. It's hard for you to keep a 5-page resume accurate and interesting, right? I want you to have an interesting resume, and if it's short, if it's a page or a page and a half, but it represents you well, that's great. That's fine. Somebody is going to be able to read that thoroughly and get a good sense of you. If it's 2 pages, that's okay too. I don't personally like to have my resume get longer than 2 pages. I just feel like it's at that point kind of a bibliography, and people are going to lose the focus on that. I do not want you to do a goal statement. And this is one of the big things, especially for someone entering a new job. It's really tempting to say, my goal is to become a database administrator. And those things I told you about, here's what I want. It's really tempting to write a sentence about those and put them on your resume. Don't do it. People get really bored and fall asleep, and they don't take those sentences seriously. It's hard. Those sentences don't come off as sincere. If you say to a hiring manager, what I really want is room to grow and learn, and I want to find a mentor, That can come off as really sincere and valuable. If you write the same thing on a resume, it's not going to work. So don't misunderstand what I'm saying there. Instead of a goal statement, I have a good alternative. I want you to write down what you've been testing and learning in your lab. So you don't have a job yet as a DBA, but you've installed a SQL Server and you've learned backups and restores real well, say. So in that case, I want you to write something like this on your resume. Have a section where you say, here are my SQL Server skills. Here is what they are. A couple things about if you do this. Anything you put on your resume here, you need to be able to talk to really well, right? So don't inflate your knowledge. You want to make sure that you're only writing things down that you can really explain to someone, and you can practice explaining this to someone. You want to make sure that this is something that you're going to be able to actually handle in an interview. This will give them a sense that you've worked with the product even though you don't have job experience with it. And I only want you to use the word experience if you actually have set up a lab and have actually done these things, right? And when you talk to people, you need to say, my experience was in a test environment because I really want to learn this technology. Here's what I went out and did to teach myself this, right? That's an example. No objective statement. Instead, talk about what it is that you do know. All right, so how do you actually get that interview, right? So you have your resume, you've really prepared for your mindset, for what you want and who you are. How do you actually get that interview? Go to your local SQL Server user group. You can send your resume out to people, and I honestly encourage you to do that, but really going to a SQL Server user group and meeting people at that group is going to be your most valuable tool of all. There are SQL Server user groups around the United States, and if you search for the Professional Association of SQL Server, they'll have a listing of SQL Server user groups in your area. You can actually go to those, and first of all, you'll learn things from the presentations they're giving. They usually meet about once a month. But you can also network with people. And that doesn't have to sound, it doesn't have to be super creepy like the word network sometimes is. What you want to do is talk to people. Let them know that you're looking for a job. Let them know that you don't have a DBA job. Explain what you're doing now. And if they are a DBA, ask how they got there and if they have advice. Often people at these groups will also know of jobs that are open too. So if you go to a user group over a period, regularly over a period of 5 or 6 months, you'll make great connections and you'll also find out about a lot of jobs. And as people hear about jobs, they'll start to think of you because they know that you're dedicated and really interested. After all, you keep coming to the user group, right? So you become part of that community and you start to have a network of people who can help you find jobs. And those face-to-face meetings at user groups really make a difference. If there isn't a user group that's near you, you can even look into starting one. And this is really going the extra mile, but you don't have to know a ton about SQL Server to actually start a user group. And that's well beyond what most people do, but most people do have a user group that's within a reasonable driving distance of you. It may be a bit of work, but this is honestly your best tool to get a job as a DBA when you don't have one. There's also something called SQL Saturday. If you go to SQLSaturday.com, this is held by the professional organization for SQL Server as well. These rotate around the United States, so these won't happen as frequently. They're all free. They're on Saturday. And when you go to a SQL Saturday, there's more people than a user group. And we have some comments attesting to the value of user groups as well. And one person who says starting user group is so easy that even I did it. So at SQL Saturday, you might be a little bit more, there's more crowds of people, but in a way, I find this easier to actually meet people because there's a lot of people who go to SQL Saturday and are just like you. They don't know anyone yet, and they're looking to meet someone. So you can actually find networking. If you find networking in a crowd a little easier than in a smaller room, SQL Saturdays are really fantastic. There's often tables set up at SQL Saturday by the organizers where you can go over to them and say, hey, I'm looking for a job. Here's my position. Who can I talk to? There's also a lot of sessions on SQL Server Basics. These are huge resources for when you're looking to get that first DBA job. At any of these things, ask for help. And just, when you talk to people, say, I am looking for a job. Here's what I have been working on. I'm trying to get my foot in the door as a DBA. What's your advice? Just literally ask people for advice. Ask them for their help. They'll be really glad that you asked them. Then once you get the interview, you've done all this work, you have an interview, how do you really make it work? This is the final step. First of all, do you read your resume? This is a big step that lots of people miss. People are really going to ask you about that resume. They're going to go into lots of details and they're going to say, and if you put that in 1992, you worked in an ice cream parlor in Delaware, they're going to ask you how many average scoops a day you did. So you've got to really re-review your resume and figure out, okay, yes, here's what they're likely to ask me about. And remember, because honestly, it can be hard to remember the details of how you solved a particular problem at a job a long time ago. They will ask you about jobs that aren't necessarily database or technical jobs. They'll ask you some questions about your experience with those jobs. Anything you put on there about your SQL Server knowledge, you want to make sure you're going to be a rock star on too. Think about some times that you have been under pressure in any jobs. Some common interview questions, especially for DBA jobs, involve how you dealt with a situation under stress. So think about, before the interview, think about what are the situations that I've been under pressure in, how did I react to those, and what are the things I did to make that a success? Because this is very likely a question you're going to be asked, and this is representing one of the skills that a DBA needs to have, where, everything's broken, everyone's looking at you to fix it, the pressure's on, what do you do, right? This is going into that trustworthiness. Think about those things we talked about what you want before. Even write down a small list of them before the interview. Anything to refresh your mind and get you talking about them, because stating those things about what you want is really going to make a great impression on you as a candidate. You want to be seen as the candidate who understands what career they want. They really want this DBA career. They've done some things to get started themselves and already prepare themselves to learn it, even though they haven't already had the job. They're a real go-getter. And they really, understand how to get there, right? That's the impression you want to give. A big component to this is also asking real, genuine questions. This is also something a lot of candidates miss out on too. They get very nervous, and I totally understand that you get nervous in that interview situation, and you don't ask real questions about what the environment is like. You want to ask questions, about how do you deal with deploying new code in production, right? So if you have any experience with working in a technical situation, but you're not a DBA, you're going to have some idea of these questions. If you don't have them, talk to those DBAs at your user groups about what questions do you ask a hiring manager when you're getting a new job. Talk to people, make down a little list, and actually go forward and ask those questions. And this is a good icebreaker to get to know people as a user group as well. What kind of questions do you ask when you're looking at getting a new job as a DBA or a database developer? Finally, just do everything you can do to help yourself be confident. Confident candidate is most likely to get really good results. Even if you're getting asked a lot of questions that you don't know the answer to, keep your chin up, smile, stay interactive, and remember, you don't have to know everything to land a job. Be confident that the work that you're doing to make yourself ready for this job is worthwhile. And remembering all the work that you've done can help keep you in the mode of the confident candidate. Because a lot of times with a DBA job, how I mentioned you have to stay up at night and it's really, really stressful. The interview itself is stressful, and the hiring manager knows this, and they want to see how you hold up under that stress. So being confident and remembering your own strengths as you get through an interview where you may not feel like you did super well can actually end up getting you a job offer for that interview when you least expect it. I've seen that happen where candidates who don't do super well on the technical components of interviews do so well on displaying themselves as a great worker and a great learner that they actually land a job offer. Here's a little recap of what we've covered today. You want to get a sense of exactly what the job is. You want to know so that you can talk about why you're good at that job, know what the job is and why people are good at it, have some opinions on that, and also understand what people are looking for and focus on some of the skills, on understanding and knowing some things that you can learn without having that job so that you can talk about those with them. Really ask hard questions during your interview and make your resume about what you know and what you've done. Don't make it fluffy, but get some concrete things on there about what you know about the technology you're trying to get into so that they know you're already making those steps. Definitely go to your user groups and be honest and confident. I think we have a few questions here. We have reached the end of the slide.
We do have questions. One question is a pretty simple one. In your DBA career, have you ever had to write reports? And has a client ever expected you to know how to do this based on your title? My experience is people have asked me if I'm able to do this, and I say no, that's a different specialization than what I do. But I know that you know how to write reports.
I do know how to write reports. And I started out as when I was more in the business user space before I got that first DBA job. I did a lot of T-SQL queries for people, and I did a lot of report design, and I just thought that was fascinating and interesting. I just then wanted to get to the other side of the data. So if you're starting that way, it can be a good way to transition in if that's what you want to do. You know, if what you want to do is actually transition into a DBA job, you can use those skills as a business user to get to know the team that supports the data and say, okay, how do you guys do this job? What's good about this job? What's bad about this job? All of that stuff, and kind of use that to transition. But you don't have to know how to write reports as a DBA. The interesting thing about the DBA job is that people have interestingly different sets of skills. Some DBAs are much more system administrator oriented. Some DBAs are much more application oriented. Some of them design schemas, some of them don't, right? So there's this core set of skills that's about keeping the database performing well. But the way that people actually hit that skill set is there's overlapping areas of that with system tuning. So,
yes.
We have a comment. I recently got my first DBA job as a SQL DBA junior by being confident in the interview and was honest about what I've done and what I've not. So fantastic. Yeah, that's really when I have a candidate who honestly tells me, you know, here's what I've done and I haven't done that, but I would like to learn it, and here's my guess, then that, you know, really impresses me.
Let me see. We have another one. My experience is primarily with Access. What's the best way to convey my general knowledge of database fundamentals as experience only with Access looked down upon?
So this is tricky, and I think we lost Brent, so I can't make any jokes about Brent's Access t-shirt. I also started working with Access, and Access is kind of joked about and looked down on. Access is kind of like the kid brother to the SQL Server database. And it's really, I still think that Access is honestly a great solution for many different things. It's all about what you're using it for, how you're using it, and how you're maintaining it. But it is what I would do if I wanted to get a job as a DBA and I was starting with Access. And what I did do is I installed a version of SQL Server and started playing with that. Some of the query language that you've learned with Access and things about joins will translate, but you'll find that T-SQL and SQL Server is a little different than SQL and Access, so you'll have to get used to that. So you've got a little bit of a ramp there, but you really want to install a test environment of SQL Server. Developer Edition you can get for, you know, $50, $60. You can run Developer Edition on Windows 7 even. You don't have to get like a server operating system or anything. And I would start learning things like backups and restores so that you can talk about that experience. And then, you know, you can translate a little bit of the query stuff that you've already learned too. So.
That's what I would have said too.
I think there was a question on certifications that I saw go by. Here's one. I'm getting my first cert for SQL Server 2008. Do I need to know all the acronyms and interconnected subsystems that connect with SQL Server to be a valid junior DBA candidate? The problem that you'll hit is that we use a lot of acronyms that we forget that not everybody is born knowing what a SAN versus a NAS is, or, you know, there's just, you know, the big IP. There's all these components to a production environment that people will just use these sort of names for, and you just, once you've used it for a while, you assume everybody knows it. I would learn a few, like, so commonly SAN storage, you know, I've learned the names of the different types of disks that are used for SQL Server, which you can kind of do from getting blogs. So there's local disk versus SAN. Those are typically the two that people are going to use. And SAN is, you can think of SAN and a starter thing as just a really expensive storage appliance that can be used by many servers. But I wouldn't worry about it too much. This is one of those things, too, where I would ask honest questions in an interview if people are talking about things that I have no idea what they mean. Stop them and say, I'm not sure what that acronym means. Can you explain that? And they'll usually be fine with that because, you know, you shouldn't be expected to know all that stuff.
A question here. The recruiters in the UK actually prefer that you have actual commercial experience. How can you bypass this? My experience with this has basically been to communicate that via resume and or cover letter about my actual knowledge, but do you have any different input, Kendra?
Really talking to the people at the user group and getting past the recruiters. And nothing against recruiters. I actually think some recruiters are fantastic, some of them not so much. Like anything else, some recruiters are great, some recruiters not so great. But getting to the user groups and connecting with people who know people who are the actual hiring people is really, really critical. And those are the people who actually kind of want to get to you. The recruiters, they want to fill the job, but they have kind of a liability issue in there too, right? So my main goal is to to actually get more direct access to the people who are hiring.
Yes.
Recruiters also will say they need experience, but if they can't find anything, they might be willing to present a candidate who doesn't have it. I don't know about how that plays in different countries, though.
Keep in mind, too, that a recruiter's job is to place you and make sure you stay there for 6 months so they receive their bonus. A recruiter's job is not actually get you a job that they want. It's to find a candidate that will get them the highest salary, because recruiters typically make 20 to 30% of your first year's salary after you stay there for 6 months. So their goal is to place a candidate who will make the most money. It's an unfortunate side effect of what they do. Let's see. Do we have any suggestions to learn querying and optimization in a lab environment? It is very easy to write terrible queries, and as I can attest. And a lot of it just comes down to working with the tools within SQL Server, finding a lot of the different tutorials available, and you can do a lot of that query and performance optimization. And if you don't have a blog, you can start one and even say, you know, even just as a record of what you've done, you can put this out there on your blog and say, you know, here's a query that I wrote. This is terrible. Here are the steps I went through to make this better. I mean, it's on your blog. It's out there as sort of a record of your work, instead of just saying, I made queries 40,000 times faster in my lab.
Yeah. There's also, so the two databases that come to mind first that you could use are, you could get the AdventureWorks sample database from Microsoft, which is free. They also have one named Contoso Retail DW. And let me put these in AdventureWorks and Contoso Retail DW. I'm putting these in a response to the question. So you can restore those and write bad queries against them. That'll save you the time of having to populate a bunch of data to write bad queries against. And then you could do something like install AdventureWorks, just write a bunch of random queries against stuff. Don't try to make them perform well at all, like Jeremiah said. And then you could watch, like I have a video on how to design smarter indexes. So you could watch that video and look at how do I do that against the AdventureWorks database. That'll help get you to some of the introductory stuff for you. So that way you don't have to generate a bunch of data yourself. Those sample databases can be good for that.
We are now 8 minutes over, so I don't know if you want to take any more questions or if you want to just head out.
Well, I don't know if I think we did a lot of the questions. Do we have any more?
We had 2 other questions. One was, any thoughts on moving to take a job? My thought on that's a pretty big decision. Make sure it's a job that you absolutely love.
Absolutely, yeah, because being away from your family has been shown to make people less happy. So think about your happiness level.
And also say, if you really love me, let me work from home.
That's really hard as a junior DBA. It's really hard to get that.
Yeah. Yes. It's hard to get reload as well, though.
Later on, you'll be able to get that. But
one question, the final question here, I think, is you mentioned the long-term stability of being a DBA. What about moving on after that 5 to 7 years of DBA? What kind of other IT roles can a senior DBA move on to?
That's a great question.
So one of the things you can do is actually move on to a architecture role and either become a database architect where you design enterprise-level systems as opposed to just individual-level systems. Consulting is always an opportunity. If you found that you like herding cats, you can move into management. And the fact that everyone is constantly yelling at you and you have nobody to yell at will make you a very good management candidate.
That's the big ones I've seen people move into, yeah. And William says there seems to be a ceiling on learning about indexes. Any books, blogs, or other stuff you can recommend? I love Gail Shaw's blog. Gail Shaw writes a lot about indexes. Check out SQL in the Wild is her blog. There's the new Stairway series. If you haven't checked those out, there's one on indexes that I think David Durant wrote that I looked at that goes into a lot of different stuff. But the truth about indexes is, and it sounds like with the ceiling, you've kind of passed the entry-level DBA thing. To somebody who's just getting into SQL Server, the hard part with index is going to be not getting overwhelmed. Focus on the basics when you're just getting started. What are they? What are they good for? How do you maintain them? But once you're away, really having a dev environment that you can generate activity against and play with them and then change them in production, that's really the way you get there after a while. But I love Gail's blog. I love that Stairway series. Kaylin and Kimberly Tripp both have lots of stuff in their blogs about them. But if you've read all that stuff, you got to get out there and quote stuff.
That's all we got.
I think that. Thanks, everybody, for attending, and we will see you next week. Oh, okay, there's one more question before we start. Oh, salary for mid-senior DBAs versus junior DBAs. Thanks for pointing that out. Okay, so I think I forgot to cover this. What I mean for the salary for the junior DBA is when you're getting into that, you really have to figure out what's the minimum you want to do is and what other things might make up for it. Because the truth really is, once you have 2 to 3 years of experience as a DBA and you really know what's what, you're going to be able to command a much higher salary than when you start, right? So you need to make sure you don't want to go too low. You do want to negotiate on salary. That's really true. But when you're getting into the junior, don't expect to get paid when a mid-level gets paid. And understand that if you really step up and learn things for a couple of years, you're going to become super marketable. And you can say to your employer at that point, here's what I could make in the marketplace. Here's what I want to make here. I want to stay with you. Please give me this raise. You don't necessarily have to leave, but you gain, after 2 years of experience, a huge amount of negotiating power on that salary. So, understand what the median is in your area, but for a junior DBA, a lot of it is, if there's a job that has a good mentor for you, it has huge room to learn and experiment, and grow, that may be worth it to you to take a smaller salary. But that's only something that you can decide, really, So think about it as an investment and think about what a smart investment is. And, sometimes a smart investment isn't taking too little. So that was a mistake I made early on. I could have gotten more for my first job and still gotten that first job. So.
Yep.
All right. Okay. Thanks, everybody. I'm going to close up the webcast now.